what we're gonna be doing here is really starting something new. So what I wanna do is remind you of we made a transition. We kind of did a about face on Tuesday, and what we did is we moved from the biggest topic in biology, which is ecology. Ecology is the everything. It's ecology kind of encompasses all the biggest stuff when it comes to biology. And we looked at all sorts of interactions, and we looked at how organisms interact with other organisms. We looked at how organisms interact with their environment. And then we started thinking about, okay, well, what about some of the specific interactions that they have with each other? Like what happens when we have organisms that work together, like the two organisms that make up a lichen. When they work really closely together, we call it a symbiosis. And then we talked about, what about like predation, where we have like an animal consumer eating another animal as part of its like way of life. And then we took that and we kind of expanded it a little bit and thought about how does that fit in with other types of sort of consumption and energy processing relationships. And what we arrived at is that there's basically two main strategies for getting two critical ingredients for all living things. Those two ingredients are energy and carbon. All of life is based around carbon. If we didn't have carbon atoms in our bodies, if living organisms didn't have carbon to work with, most scientists think that it wouldn't be possible for there to be living organisms. Our working hypothesis is if there are organisms in other parts of the galaxy or universe, if there's any kind of extraterrestrial life, it's probably going to be carbon-based. Carbon is an incredibly useful, versatile little atom. So everything has to get carbon. Plants get carbon from air. There's carbon in the air. Not a ton, but enough. It's in the form of carbon dioxide. They breathe in carbon dioxide. They don't call it breathing because they don't have lungs, but they pull carbon dioxide into themselves, and then they take it apart, and they put those carbon atoms back together again in a way that's more useful. We also breathe in carbon. We breathe in carbon dioxide every breath. We breathe in carbon dioxide. The problem is we don't have any internal machinery that allows us to take that carbon dioxide apart and use those carbon atoms for something more useful. We can't do it. So we breathe carbon dioxide in, and then we breathe carbon dioxide back out. We don't process the carbon dioxide that we inhale, but we still need carbon. We get that carbon from the things that we eat. We get carbon when we eat plants like lettuce and oranges. We get carbon when we eat dairy or meat. We eat carbon in the form of things like fats and proteins and sugars. And then our body can take those things and break them apart and use those to make the other things that we need. So we get our carbon from other living organisms. Plants get their carbon from the air. And the other really critical thing that every living organism needs is energy. Plants get their energy from sunlight. And what they do is they catch a little piece of sunlight. Sunlight comes in pieces. You may know this. It comes in little pieces called photons. So a photon is a little piece of sunlight. And basically what happens is plants grab a little piece of light, and then they take that piece of light and they store it. And where they store it is in molecules that are largely made up of carbon. When plants hook carbon atoms together, or hook carbon atoms together with other things, as they do that, they store energy in those chemical bonds. So remember when we were looking at the building molecules simulation on Tuesday? Those white lines that connected the molecules together stored energy. They get their energy from sunlight and they put it into molecules that have carbon in them. We get our energy from those molecules that have carbon in them. When we eat plants or animals, we ingest the carbon molecules, and then when we break them apart, bloop, some energy is released. And our cells capture that energy and use it to do something else, move something in or out, or to put something together, or to break something apart. And so that carbon and that energy is critical for everything. And we were looking at that with the activity that you did on Tuesday, which was the Thanksgiving feast activity, thinking about like what are the kinds of things that we can eat? How do we fit into a food web, which is sort of ecology stuff, and then how does our fitting into a food web help us understand where we get our carbon and energy, which is moving into the biochemistry stuff. And now we're going to slide like fully into biochemistry, and what we're going to be thinking about is what actually is going on when it comes to the stuff that's in our bodies. How does the stuff that's in our bodies like work and interact to make us the way that we are? And there's a couple of cool things to think about with that we don't think about this stuff in general. And the reason we don't think about it, is because we are so used to it that it doesn't seem crazy to us. But when you think about it, you'll realize it actually is totally crazy. And so here's a couple of examples. How many of you have had a cut recently?
What?
How many of you have had a cut recently? Raise your hand. Okay, here's what's crazy about cuts is you get a cut, and then pretty soon, like, you get a little scab, and then underneath the scab, all sorts of biological magic happens, and then the scab falls off, and your skin has like healed, and it's back together. But here's something that's kind of crazy. If you were to take your fingers and hold them together, even tape them together for a really long time, how many people have ever had their fingers taped together because you had like a broken finger or a sprained finger, right? Maybe for days or even weeks. If you tape your fingers together for days or weeks, and then you take the tape off, you take your fingers, they come right apart. Your skin won't grow together unless there's a cut. And that's kind of crazy if you think about it, because your skin doesn't have a brain. Your skin doesn't know what it is. Like if I were to ask my finger, hey, what are you? It's not super like conversational. It doesn't know. There's no understanding, there's no thinking that goes on with this. And even my brain is not actively part of this. Not like it's not like when I put my fingers together like this, if I were to tape them together, I wouldn't have to like lie in bed at night and think, don't stick together, don't stick together, don't grow together, don't grow together. I don't have to do that. We don't have to do that when a cut heals either. Somehow, the skin that's cut is able to heal, it just does. Whereas when you hold your skin adjacent to another piece of skin, it doesn't grow together. And that's kind of cool and kind of crazy. Here's some other things to think about. Like all the different chunks that make up a person. Your ear, and your nose, and your hair, and your mouth, and your fingers. All those things, they kind of work differently and they sort of do their own thing, but we don't have to think about it. There's no central planning that goes on with that. Somehow, my nose, the part of my nose that can smell things, right? Like if somebody makes a delicious lunch and I go near it, then I smell and like but I can't smell with my hand or my ear or my hair. Well, okay, like count me out for this, but all of you have hair, and your hair, like, it doesn't grow out as one big thick rope out of the top of your head, right? It's not like you have one strand of hair that's 6 inches in diameter that just grows out of the top of your head. Like somehow your hair grows and it grows separately and it has color and it has curl and like we control some of it like length, but a lot of it we don't really have any direct control over. And that's really kind of crazy. You can move your eyeballs all around, look in a whole bunch of different directions, but if I want to hear something behind me, I can't just move my ears. Like some of us can wiggle our ears a little bit, but not like that. But other animals can move their ears. Like, how many of you have like watched your cat do this thing? Right? Like they rotate their ears. So like there's all these different rules that govern how all the different parts of us work, yet we're like, somehow we're just like one thing. And we all stick together in just the right way. My arms are attached where my arms are attached, and I can't like move them down and like have an arm coming out of my forehead or an arm coming out of my knee or something like that. Like all this stuff just sort of happens. We stick together in the right way, and everything works in the right way. And here's what's crazy. All of it is the exact same thing. It's all little bags of chemicals. That's it. Our entire body, every part of us, every bacteria, every fungus, every single living organism on this planet all works the same way. It's a little bag of chemicals. And that little bag of chemicals is doing stuff. What's happening are chemical reactions inside that bag of chemicals. Chemicals are reacting with other chemicals, they're changing. Some of those chemical reactions cause things to come out of the bag, right? And that's like the little bags that store the goo that's us can secrete things. Things can come out of those bags, and things can go into those bags. That's how come if I eat a banana, it doesn't just like fall out of my body as a banana, right? Like my body digests the banana, and then the parts of the banana that those little bags of goo need moves into the little bags of goo. So things go out and things go in the little bags of goo. And the little bags of goo, like some of the things that come out of them are sticky. So when my skin heals, that happens because the little bags of goo that make up my skin like push out little sticky chemicals, like glue chemicals, and those glue chemicals cause the skin to stick together. But those same little bags of goo know, and they don't do that when it's just my fingers coming together like this. And all of this happens, and it's all the same basic principle, which is chemical reactions. That's it. So when we think about biochemistry, what we're really thinking about is something that isn't showing up. What we're really thinking about is how the little bags of goo, yeah, gotcha, thank you.
You're awfully loud.
What we're really thinking about is how the little bags of goo work together on the order of billions. Like we have billions of cells in our body, those are the bags, and inside those bags of goo are millions of chemicals, and all those chemicals are reacting. And all those chemicals are reacting in such a way that all those billions of bags of goo make a person. And that is pretty intense. So that's really what we're going to be looking at for the next several weeks and we got to keep it simple because it's way too complicated for us to track. I was thinking about this the other night, and you two might know this. Has anybody succeeded in creating an actual working computer model of even the simplest cell, with like down to the DNA and ribosomes and stuff like that? I don't think we have. Like, I don't think we have a computer model of a biological cell that can emulate all of the reactions, the chemical reactions that goes on in a real cell. I don't think we can do that, even our most powerful computers. We can't even begin to really conceptualize how complex all this is. But what we're going to do is we're going to keep it simple. We're going to just think about kind of the first level of these things. And one of the things that we need to think about is what are these bags of goo? And what's inside of them? Well, the bags of goo, and we'll talk more about this down the road, but the bags of goo are called cells, and they're the basic unit of life. Every living organism is made up of at least one cell. And inside those cells, mostly water, actually. But mixed in with the water is a bunch of other things. And those other things are chemicals. The cell itself the outside of it is made of chemicals. So what we have is a bag made of chemicals that's holding mostly water that's filled with some other chemicals. And it's all packaged up. And the really crazy thing is that it's all packaged up in such a way that we don't just fall apart. Like if we were to take all of my ingredients, all of the water, all of the protein, all of the DNA, all of the, everything, and just put it into like a tank, you would have a big blob of goo that had the exact same ingredients as a damn Brigar, but it wouldn't be a damn Brigar because it's not packaged up right. So the packaging is what's really key. And that gives organisms what we call structure. Divides things up in just the right way, puts things together in just the right way, so that they can all work instead of just being a big, blob. And then the chemicals that are in our bodies also are doing stuff. It's chemicals that are responsible for me being able to talk right now. It's chemicals that are making my vocal cords vibrate so that you can hear my voice. It's chemicals that are making my eyeballs move. It's chemicals that are making your ears send nerve impulses to your brain in response to vibrations in the air. Those chemicals, those chemical reactions, are what allow living organisms to do stuff, and we call that function. So chemicals are responsible for structure and function, and then the other thing that we do with chemicals is we use them as a source of energy. Now, some of us are like, wait, not plants. Plants get their energy from the sun. Yeah, but they use that energy to make sugar. And once they have sugar, then they use that sugar everywhere else. So if you look at what's going on in a plant, the cells of a plant, for the most part, they're not directly using sunlight. They use the sunlight to make sugar, and then they use the sugar for everything else. It's like charging your battery in your phone, right? Like, where does your phone get its energy? Well, from the wall, right? But it's not like you need the wall for your phone to run. You need the wall to charge your battery. Once you've charged your battery, then your phone is good. And that's what sugar is. Sugar is like a battery inside living cells. Plants can charge those batteries. We can't. We have to eat our batteries. Plants charge their batteries with sunlight. So structure, function, energy, it's all chemicals. We're mostly water mixed together with some other chemicals. The way those things are put together and arranged is why I'm a damn Brigar and not a blob of goo. Although I know probably some of you are like, you're sort of a blob of goo, Brigar, but I'm not really. Mostly I'm a living person. So let's talk about this. And there's a couple of cool things that we can think about when it comes to these chemicals. And we're going to look at these today. You all are going to look at these today. And one of those things is that some kinds of changes that happen to the chemicals that are in living organisms are purely physical, and some are purely chemical. And we can kind of think about it in terms of let's say I take this piece of paper. And if I were to take this piece of paper and so it's one piece of paper, right? Like this is a thing. But if I tear it in half, I haven't really fundamentally changed it. Something's different because it's not stuck together anymore. And actually, I can't make it stick together. I could glue it, but it wouldn't be perfect, would it? I could tape it, it still wouldn't be perfect. I could try my best to attach these two pieces of paper, but they're never going to be the same. But they're still paper. So I haven't fundamentally altered what this really is. But if I were to get a blowtorch and burn it, that would be really different, wouldn't it? Like if I were to walk over to this cart and get a blowtorch, and I were to light this paper on fire, now we're really looking at something different here, aren't we? This isn't paper anymore. When you burn a piece of paper, you end up with something that isn't a piece of paper. And that's really what we're looking at when we think about chemical versus physical changes. Chemical changes may mean that you don't really have what you started with at all anymore. Physical changes are different. So we're going to go through this real quick, and then you're going to have some time to explore this stuff in class. So sometimes things change physically, and when that happens, physical changes involve a change in the way something looks, but if we were to look at the pieces, the molecules that make up the substance, remember molecules, what we get when we hook atoms together, those don't change. So when I take this piece of paper and I rip it in half, I end up with the exact same molecules I started with. They were hooked together before, and they're torn apart after, but there's no change to the actual molecules themselves. But when we have a chemical change, it's a little different. Chemical changes actually involve changes in the way that the atoms are connected. We break molecules apart, or we put them together in different ways. The chemical bonds that you were seeing in that building a molecule activity on Tuesday, those chemical bonds are not there, all of them, and new ones have formed. We have a new substance chemically. We have new molecules that we didn't have to start with. And sometimes it's a little hard to tell. Like with the paper, it was pretty easy. You tear the paper, everybody would agree that's a physical change, nothing really has happened to it. But sometimes it's a little harder to figure it out, because sometimes, like when we look at water evaporating, if I have water and it evaporates, it looks really different. Like I don't see it anymore. It doesn't seem to have any weight. Like it really seems different. But actually, evaporation of water, we started with those same H2O molecules that we ended up with. You looked at those the other day. You looked at H2O molecules and building molecules activity. That's water. And water that's in like a cup and water that's in the air is the same when we look at each individual molecule. So instead of asking ourselves, like, has it changed a lot, which is really hard to tell, we usually use other evidence to try to determine whether we're looking at a physical or a chemical change. If there's a chemical change, typically we'll see things like heat being produced, or sometimes like not produced, sometimes removed. We might see light. We might see where there were no solid substances before, we might see solid things appear. So sometimes we'll mix two liquids together and we'll see something solid come out of it. That is a chemical change, typically. We might smell things, or we might notice changes in color or temperature. So for example, if I were to light this candle on fire, we're not going to see dramatic changes, at least in the short term, to the candle itself, right? Like this candle isn't going to go up in flames the way that the piece of paper did, but we can use some cues to try to determine whether it's a physical or a chemical change. So the first is, is there heat? Like, do candles produce heat? Yeah, that's a good sign. Do we see light from a candle? We do. What about the formation of solid substances? Is there something, like, do we see, like, is there something solid that wasn't, I don't think so, not with a candle. We will see in just a second, there is something that shows up, but it's not quite the same as like mixing two liquids together and seeing something like form in the mixture. What about smells? Can you all smell like that? So part of that's the match, but candles often have smells as well, and you can certainly, even an unscented candle has a characteristic smell. We can smell burning, so that's a sign that it's a chemical change. Changes in color. Now, this candle had been lit already, but if you've ever lit a new candle, you've probably seen the wick starts out as it's white, and then when you light it, it turns black. That's a change in color. It's a good indication that it's a chemical change. And then temperature is another thing that we can think about when you're looking at a change in temperature, and that could mean that it gets hotter or it gets colder. And so in this case, the candle itself isn't changing temperature. When we talk about changes in temperature, usually we're talking about like we mix two liquids, we put our hands on them and it's cold, or we put our hands on them and it's hot, where before they were room temperature. Those are indications of chemical change. So we can pretty easily classify this.
Okay, well,
No, you would do it wrong. You pretty easily classify this as a chemical change. And then remember I said we might see something appear, and we do see something appear. We see these tiny little particles. And those little particles aren't pieces of candle, nor are they pieces of wick. They're ash. It's like the same thing that happened to the paper. Those little particles of smoke are chemically different from what we started with. So we can see that as well. What we're gonna be looking at today is just like trying to do some detective work to try to figure out if certain things are a result of physical or chemical changes. Sometimes we can't really tell. Sometimes the things that happen are a little tricky. Sometimes it's like, well, I don't think it was a chemical change, but it was, or I don't think it was a physical change, but it was. But a lot of times we can just use these cues to figure things out. Our bodies do both of these things. Chemical and physical changes are part of what happened inside our bodies. We have to have both. We have to have both of those things going on in order to be living organisms. So it's not that the only thing that matters is the chemicals, but it turns out primarily what makes living things living are the chemical reactions. That's the big difference. Okay? And then what I am going to have you all do is going to be you doing stuff in the back of the room, and so I want to just go through some lab safety really quick, and I will say that first of all, nothing that we're doing or using is like imminently dangerous. It's not like mercury where like it's like really bad stuff to work with, but where things get dicey is when people don't take it seriously. And so I'm going to talk to you about all the things that we're going to be looking at, but what I want to make sure that you understand is that it's when almost always where people get injured or things go awry is when somebody's trying to be funny. And so what that means is if it's irresistible to you to make a joke with these things, you might find yourself pulled from the lab area because I don't want to risk it. And basically what it boils down to is like the stuff we're going to be doing is of most concern if they get in your eyes. Some of the things we're going to be using are like water, not that big of a deal. Some of the things that we're using seem like they shouldn't be a big deal. Like there's these little containers of salt. That shouldn't be a big deal, right? Like salt water in your eye, like is that like great? Well, I mean, no, but I mean, it's not dangerous, except this salt probably is dangerous because this salt has been handled by hundreds of students. The container has been handled by it. Students have like taken a scoop from one chemical and then put it right into the salt. We don't know what else is in here. So there might be something in here that really is dangerous for your eyes. This bottle of antacid tablets, I looked at this the other day, this is great. The expiration date, May of 2002. So this expired more than 21 years ago. And that in and of itself doesn't mean it's dangerous. It does mean that it may not be the same as what it was 21 years ago. Like this may not have the same chemicals in it that it did 21 years ago. But this wouldn't be dangerous just for being 21 years old, except, I want you to think about how many students have had their paws in this bottle of antacid over the past 21 years, since before you were born. Just imagine the grossest human beings on the planet, like picking their noses and then extracting one of these, like, right? So
wearing gloves, right?
Yeah, well, no, you don't need to wear gloves. But what you do need to do is recognize that if you think it's the height of hilarity to eat our lab materials, what you're really doing is you're taking a huge risk, because we have no idea. Like, nose picking aside, what really concerns me about this is the possibility that somebody was touching like a heavy metal like cadmium, and then they reached in, grabbed a tablet, and now these are contaminated with cadmium. We don't know. So you have to be careful with that. There are these squirt bottles. The big temptation is to pretend to squirt them at somebody. Ha-ha! Except this is hydrochloric acid. And so if you do that, and it turns out that like the lid might be loose and maybe it like the dropper opens up as you do it, or maybe it wasn't even screwed on all the way. And so you, as a joke, splash somebody, but it ends up actually like you're trying to pretend that you're gonna do it, but it actually happens. That's not great, not with hydrochloric acid. This is even worse. This stuff is called silver nitrate, and this is not good. You don't want to get this on your skin, you don't want to get this in your eyes, you don't want to get it on your clothes, and it's the same deal. It's where, and again, I want to emphasize, where the problems happen is when people make what they think is a funny, harmless joke. And what I'm telling you with absolute, like, inflexibility is, don't do that. This isn't the place. This isn't the time. You're not at the, Boys and Girls Club or YMCA where it's funny to like splash somebody with water from the water fountain. Here, assume everything is contaminated and dangerous, okay? And then you take care of yourself by wearing goggles. If you want gloves, you can have them. I would not recommend gloves. One of the problems with gloves is that they protect your skin if the gloves stay intact, but if the gloves aren't intact, then they actually can trap things against your skin. None of these things is so dangerous that getting a little on your skin is gonna like present an immediate health hazard. So the best thing to do, don't wear gloves, and if you get anything on your hands, rinse them real well, and then wash them with soap and water, okay? And if we need to handle something that is immediately caustic, that's when we'll be using gloves. The other big issue is, hang on, let me go through my list here. So the other big issue is glass, and that we have two things that are made of glass, test tubes, and well, three things. Test tubes, we have graduated cylinders, and we have thermometers. And if you are being safe and responsible, you still might break something accidentally because it just happens. But what I want you to do is do not automatically start picking things up, because even if you want to be helpful, what ends up happening if you handle broken glass is that it makes a much bigger problem for the rest of us, because you might cut yourself with contaminated glass, and then we have to call 911 and like do a bunch of stuff that's not worth it. So what I need you to do, if you break a piece of glassware, just let me know, or Mr. Fiskin know, or Katie know. We'll take care of it for you, and just don't touch it. I know you want to be helpful, but don't touch it. And then, as I mentioned, if you get any chemicals on your skin, rinse and wash. Do that anyway, especially before you eat or drink anything. You got to make sure that you wash your hands really well. And then, as part of just the general not goofing around, just like rein in your youthful enthusiasm back there. And then the last thing is food and drink. We got to keep it away from the lab benches. No food, no drinks. You can still eat and drink up here, but the protocol is you go to the sink, you wash your hands, soap and water, and then you come up and you can eat or drink. I don't want you to starve, and I don't want you to be thirsty, but I want you to be thirsty. All right, and the work that you're going to be doing, so I'm going to show you one more example here, but the work that you're going to be doing involves playing around with a bunch of stuff. And most of it's on this card. I'm going to just show you one other thing. So I've already showed you the first thing, which is a candle, a lit candle. You already saw that, and you can think about what you saw. The other thing that I want to show you really quickly is a little strip of metal, and you've heard of this. This actually is a common ingredient in supplements like vitamins and stuff. And but it also is really fun to burn. So this makes a super bright flame, and you can imagine what it probably feels like in terms of heat and stuff. So those two reactions you just saw. The rest of the things that you're going to do are you're going to take charge of them. And what I'm going to do is I would like you to have glasses on. So I'm going to open the glasses cabinets, and you should take a break, use the bathroom or get a drink or whatever. When you come back, get your glasses on, and the cart will be in the back, and you can get to work.